Hey everyone, welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy, I'm the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. How are you all doing? Month 5 of quarantine, month 2 of absolute fascism? Not absolute. That's the wrong choice of adjective. How about dawning fascism? I guess it's been dawning for a long time, but imminent? Is that the word I'm looking for? Anyway, I hope you are doing what you can, whether it's donating, fundraising, writing, calling your reps, doing on-the-ground activism. By the way, this is a very good episode. This is Sam Prekop. I was extremely excited. I've been a fan of the Sea and Cake for decades now, since college. Since I first heard, I think Nassau, maybe the first self-titled one. But I've been a huge fan. And so now that I'm in quarantine doing these by Zoom, I'm like, okay, I'm going to just reach out to everyone who I love but does not live in Los Angeles, to see if they want to talk. And, well, if you don't know who Sam is, let me read you his bio very quickly. Sam Prekop grew up in Chicago, and while he went to art school, forming the band Shrimp Boat sent him off in a completely different direction. When that band broke up in the early 90s, he formed the Sea and Cake with Archer Pruitt of the Cocktails and Tortoise's John McIntyre, and over the last 2.5 decades, they've released 11 albums, the most recent being 2018's Any Day. As a solo artist, Sam has released 4 albums, all on Thrill Jockey, and his latest, Comma, will be out this September. This was actually recorded. This is one of the first ones that I recorded while in quarantine. But, the schedule shifted around a lot between, spending days cleaning groceries. Literally takes hours now to go to the grocery store and come back. But between that and once the George Floyd protest started, the schedule changed drastically. So this one's from early on. We're still optimistic that the pandemic and the lockdown is only going to last a little while. How naive we were in those early days of the pandemic. This is a very cool talk. Sam's a very thoughtful dude. We talk a lot about actually the process of making art. And when you hear about his childhood, you will know why that is such a topic. And I think when I say the process, I mean the literal, the tactile nature of making art, which I think is something near and dear to Sam's heart. So I hope you enjoy this one. If you do, and you want to check out other episodes of the show, they're all up on Spotify. You can download the MP3s at beginnings.libsyn.com. I've been doing this show for over 10 years now. I've talked to hundreds of writers and musicians and actors and thinkers and artists. If you are interested in Sam Prekop, you might be interested. I talked to Spiral Stairs, John Darnielle, Greg from Deerhoof, David Grubbs, David Harrington from Kronos Quartet, Sadie Dupuis of Speedy Ortiz, Colin Newman of Wire, and tons of other people. So check out those episodes. If you like what you hear and you want to subscribe, you can do that on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, or whatever it's transmorphing into. And you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Andy Beckerman. Okay, thank you so much for listening. Great episodes coming up, including Owen Pallett from Final Fantasy and Arcade Fire, Mac McCon of Superchunk, Josh Radner of How I Met Your Mother, and tons more cool people, so stay tuned. But for now, let's talk to Sam. Before you had said things are bleak in Chicago. I mean, things seem to be bleak pretty much everywhere. Are you the kind of person that Do you have like walls up? Like, does that stuff leak into your life, leak into your, like your emotional life? Or are you pretty, I don't know what stoic is the word I'm looking for, but something like that?
Stoic might work. I don't know. I mean, I pay too much attention to the news, I guess. I'm not, I can't claim to be super active in the community. I mean, I feel part of it, definitely. I live in a very Mexican neighborhood in Chicago, and we've been here for like 20 years. And it's, a lot of people are broke, but it's also changing. In some ways for the better, in other ways, the usual gentrification problems, issues. But people are not shooting each other on the streets like they were like 10 years ago. So I see that as a bonus to how things have changed quite a bit.
Wow.
So it's a rough neighborhood in a lot of ways. It's sort of beautiful in a lot of other ways. I mean, it looks like Chicago always has. It hasn't changed aesthetically. You know, the sort of a lot of the same storefronts and stuff are still here, and the buildings are have been kept up, and they're all really quite old. So it's sort of a special part of Chicago in a way. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I've not been hanging out with people out on the street, but it's just too much news is getting to me, and I suppose that's affecting my outlook on the whole thing.
But there is a certain kind of person who, it just like whatever the emotional zeitgeist is, just kind of like bounces off them. I'm not like that. I'm generally like a sponge. It just like I soak up whatever kind of emotions or what kind of the atmosphere is around me. So if like everyone is feeling dread, then, and I'm Jewish, so I naturally feel dread all the time. But like, right. if the emotional zeitgeist is dread, then that kind of like I get a double dose of it. Like I don't have good boundaries between me and the world.
No, I feel like I have pretty good boundaries actually. It's out there, but I think, the nature of what I have to do all the time, I'm sort of hiding from everything anyways, in art and music. And so it's quite actually handy in this situation in a way. So I feel pleasantly isolated from the dread. However, it's two sides of the coin, definitely. I mean, I'm definitely affected by what's going on, but it's not changing my day to day, I guess. Or my emotional state so much.
Were you always like that?
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, I think it's sort of a flaw of the sort of, the artistic personality or traits, that I'm quite self-centered to a fault, I guess, in some ways.
Well, I mean, that's interesting.
I mean, it's just what I have to do to get the work done in a way. I'm not actually focused on me beyond the work so much, sort of. I mean, a lot of times I worry that I live to do the work, basically. That's basically what I want to do as much as possible. But it was good for me to have kids. That's helped shake it up quite a bit. For the best.
Well, in some way, kids are analogous to the music you make in some way, because it's now this. If you are, like you said, living to make this thing, like living for this stuff, that is in some way an extension of you, right?
Right.
Also, your children are in some way an extension of you. Hopefully that doesn't become pathological, but right. But
let's hope. No, they're doing fine.
But I mean, it is interesting because this idea of like that you brought up, like the artistic personality, I think it's like a spectrum. There are some people who are just like pure narcissists who happen to, living here in Los Angeles, there are so many sociopaths I've met who happen to be good artists, but because they're good at making things, they're good at writing a script that has actual emotional or thematic content to it, because they've learned how to mimic human behavior in such a resonant way that they can do the work that someone who actually feels those things and puts it into their work, right? There's that far end of it. And then there's this end where, well, I don't even know how to define the different ends of the spectrum, but like you are, I think the way you described it, I'll say this and then you can tell me if this feels right, but like there's almost like a workman-like where you're like, I'm here, I have these ideas or I have these thoughts, or I don't know what your process is, but like in general, like I'm going to make this thing in the world and I'm just going to keep doing this.
Yeah, I do like to think of it as workmanlike. I'm never like setting out to fulfill a goal. It's like the day to day. I mean, the physicality of drawing or painting, and also touching a guitar or my Sims or whatever.
Yeah.
It's kind of a benefit. The busy work is handy, to get you to the meat of it, I guess, in some ways, which I'm never all that concerned with. I have a certain faith that I'll recognize something good happening when it occurs, but I have to do the day-to-day, the busy work for it to happen. And
Yeah.
I've always been a proponent of, you just have to work all the time. Otherwise, that's what you have to do. That's like the first rule, I think. And I figured that out pretty early on. I've always, I went to art school. I worked super hard in that pursuit, and same with the music stuff. I've never needed really external motivation to do it, and I feel like that's one of my greatest. I've been blessed with not getting bored by almost anything, any of my pursuits, and I'm able to like focus to a fault perhaps on whatever I'm doing and sort of not be swayed by distractions that would take me away from that excellent busy work, handiwork. And then a big part of my job is just recognizing when the more interesting things rise to the top, and I sort of seize on those and make a point of those. And then, it's none of this is. It's easy actually when I'm just starting out and messing around, but to get it past that busy work is when it becomes much more difficult.
Yeah, it's interesting you use the word faith. Do you feel like for me, it's kind of like an instinct I've developed over time where I'm able to, you're doing the kind of like just the craft of something, right? Whatever, if I'm writing a script or I'm coming up with a narrative for something, or, whatever it is. And at some point I just have this like feeling inside where I'm like, oh, this sucks, and let it go. Or like put it aside and think if I can figure out if I can make it better. Or I'm like, oh no, this is good. And I know how to like start actually, sculpting it into something I don't like mixing metaphors, but like sculpt it, into something that will be good. Right.
Yeah. I mean, I think that internal dialogue is a huge part of the work as well, obviously. And that's the hard, I exist with continuous arguments with myself with whether something's not that it's the end all. If I decide something's lousy, I just do something else, kind of.
Yeah.
And I think that's a skill or a strategy that you have to arrive at. I think that's probably difficult when you're starting out, to figure out that not everything is going to be great, or perhaps nothing is. And in a way, I never feel entirely satisfied in a weird way, which is also kind of useful to keep it, to keep doing the work in a way. I always feel one thing when I finish a record, when I decide it's done, it's sort of like the last time I actually listen to it. I'm like, okay, that sounded great, but
Yeah.
don't push it and keep playing it. And And so, like my latest record, I've heard it like once or twice, and I will not listen to it again, and I'll just assume that someone else might like it, and that's fine. And now, so therefore, I can work on the next thing and sort of stop dwelling on it.
So wait, it's like it gets to like a certain, there's like a precariousness.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah. So wait, that the kind of like this instinct that I said, or like when you said like there's you have this some kind of faith that this will become something good, you know, when you decide that yes, this is the thing I'm going to work on.
At least good enough.
Yeah.
To stop. Yeah.
For me, at least, that's like this internalized voice that's come out of me writing for, you know, 10 years, 12 years, whatever, however long I've been doing this. For you, was it like, and some part of it, it's like the voices of people who I've trusted throughout the years in some way. I don't even know how to explain it. It sounds a little like new agey, or like pop psychology. But like there are parts of like the people, like even like they don't even have to be writers. Just like people like when I went to grad school for philosophy. So like my mentor there, like parts of like the voice in my head when I'm having this kind of like discussion there are these internalized pieces of those people. I'm curious if that's the same for you, if this is just solely like, if there are people from your past that you've internalized their thoughts.
I've never thought about that actually, and now that you mention it, I don't think so. No, I don't think I'm thinking about. I mean, it depends. So if I'm working on Tea and Cake stuff, of course I have the other members in mind. But in a way, I think it would cause more problems if I was thinking about what they might think about something. And we all, since we've worked together so long, there's a sort of unsaid trust amongst each other. You know, they trust that I'll start off on the right foot and they'll be able to take the next step with that work kind of. So until we get together, then that's another kind of dialogue. You know, working in a band is, I feel very fortunate to be in that situation in comparison to my solo stuff, which is, you know, all on my own, which is much harder to get through in a way. So the band dynamic is great, actually, and that's why I'm still in a band, I guess, even though we're not always doing stuff all the time. But I'm not. So when I'm writing songs or getting the beginnings of things, I'm actually not thinking about what they're going to think. I trust that they'll know what to do, and I trust that they'll trust me that I'm taking it in some sort of direction.
So I'm getting a picture of you. I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm getting this picture that you're kind of like an insular person.
I'd say so, yeah.
When you were a child, were you pretty insular as well?
I would think so. Not a loner so much. I mean, I grew up with a brother and plenty of friends and stuff like that. But yeah, insular in terms of, exposing interior life, basically, yes.
Yeah.
I'd say so, yeah. And that would still be the case. So yeah, my work is definitely not trying to deal with that so much or expose it. Beyond the sort of the mystery of expressiveness, I guess, is what I like to term it as in a way. I mean, I feel like I'm expressive, but beyond expressing it's a conundrum. I mean, it definitely reflects my interior life and what I think about what makes something interesting or emotive to somebody and myself, but it's not about how I'm feeling at any particular time about something necessarily. It's kind of all about the work, which is about me without saying. It's a trap. It goes round and round.
It's almost, I mean, I can kind of diagram it in my head. Like I see where like how but I mean, maybe it's like, maybe a good way to say it is like it's dialectical in some way where you are, it's of yourself, but it's not of yourself at the same time.
I mean, it's not about me, I guess. It's about the work, which is of me, I guess you could say that.
Yeah. It springs forth from you.
Right. It's not about me, but it is me in an odd way, I guess.
Yeah.
That's messed up. But yeah, go ahead.
No, I think the best art is in some way an extension of your ego into the world, but it doesn't necessarily have to be like, this song's about how I felt sad when my girlfriend broke up with me or whatever, right? Whatever your typical song fodder is.
I heard a quote the other day, and I unfortunately don't know who it was, but it was, it was like Walt Whitman or something. Someone asked him to describe his poem, and he's like, why would do you want a less version of that poem? What I could say about it, sort of. And I thought that was good and interesting.
That's what stopped me when I used to write music criticism, and at some point when you could just hear an album online, I was like, I don't know what the point of this anymore is. I'm like, ostensibly, I'm supposed to be describing the music in some way or putting it into context.
Oh, right.
Because you can't hear it, and now you can. So what's my role anymore?
Oh, that's interesting, yeah.
But, okay, so, like, when you were a child, right, I understand, like, what you're saying resonates with me a lot because I'm also a pretty insular person. I have moments where I, like, where I need to be social or like I, feel like hanging out with my friends. But a lot of time I'm like recharging on my own. And this has always been the way I was, when I was a child, I was like this. And so I'm trying to think about like how much of it like comes out of like the circumstances I was in and how much of it is just like, well, that's the way my brain was. I don't know if you've thought about this, I know a very little bit about your parents. You were born in London to American parents. I think I read that your dad was there on a Fulbright scholarship.
Right.
But, are they very intellectual? When you were growing up, were they very intellectual people? Obviously, Fulbright.
Yeah, they're both artists. My mom has passed away, but my dad is still makes art. And so I grew up in what you would call an artist's house or whatever. My dad taught at the Art Institute in Chicago and was the dean there eventually and stuff like that. So I grew up around art, people making art, other artists hanging out and all that kind of stuff. And academia in a sense, except it was art school. But
yeah.
So growing up, they weren't like, you should be an artist, you must, it's got to happen. But I knew I would be very early on. Not a musician, that was a fluke much later. So I grew up believing and thinking that I was an artist at a young age, and so I worked at it. And I was encouraged as well, but they didn't, it was not demanded of me at all. But yeah, I had a great child. I grew up we had a great hi-fi, a lot of records. My mom was an amazing cook, so food was a big deal early on. Lots of people around. I sort of, I had a lot of adult friends as a kid, which I think is sort of interesting and made a difference in a way. And it's sort of like I was treated not as an adult, but as a peer in an odd way. As a little kid, but I knew a lot of my parents' friends and stuff. Yeah. So it was all good. In Chicago, I grew up. Basically. In like city kids, I was on the street and whatever stuff like that.
I mean, when you say that you had a lot of adult friends. At first, when you were describing it, I imagined that you were just like your parents are having these salons and you're kind of like a fly on the wall, kind of like absorbing all this stuff. Because I remember that's the way it was with my parents. You know, I was just sitting there and I would absorb, you know, what the stuff they were talking about. And then they would ask me like, how do you know about like the Marx Brothers or whatever? I don't remember.
Right.
Just like some old thing that I should have known about. But because I was sitting there and just kind of like witnessing them talk about, you know, these things, whatever they were talking about.
I mean, it was a combination of that but they also paid attention to me. I mean, that's a big thing, I think. So they weren't focused on me, but I wasn't excluded. And it was just a very natural give and take. And I think it's just, my parents had good friends. And my dad and mom, also facilitated, we weren't segregated somewhere else, kind of, it was sort of naturally incorporated into the scene that was happening. And another big deal is we always had exchange students living with us often, so there was a program with a university in the UK, and that was a big deal and important, I think, to have. They weren't, they were students, but they would be in our house, and they were obviously much older than I was at the time. They would be 20 or 21 or something. And so that was good too. I hadn't thought about that until right now, actually. But so I think that was a perk to growing up in artists academia household or whatever, that kind of stuff. That sort of free flow of people and stuff happening, and yeah.
So you're treated like an adult pretty early on.
I wouldn't say treated like one, but granted that sort of acknowledgement, I guess, in a way. I mean, they weren't, I don't think I was sitting at the table holding adult conversations necessarily, but I think I just got a genuine feeling from a lot of my parents' friends that they were listening to me, basically. And, it was a sort of natural give and take. I wasn't putting on airs that I was older than I was, really, and I don't think I was getting that vibe from them. But it was sort of, I think it's also something to do with artists. You can sort of, there's an appreciation that can be shared amongst generations, perhaps. It's sort of like, I think I could show them something I was working on, and since they were also artists, they could have something to say about it. I think maybe that's where the scrim is broken in a way or whatever. They could be, like, oh, that drawing's amazing. Why and how did you start? Stuff like that, rather than discussing, politics or the economy or something. It wasn't. I think art was the common denominator, and that sort of makes it happen.
Right. Like, they're not asking you your opinions on like a Calvino story or something like that,
right,
but they are bringing you in. So like but I think this is interesting though. They're bringing you from an early age into this idea of what it is to make art and what it is to be part of kind of like a community of artists and also part of the history of creating things.
I think so. Without telling me, it was more showing me, basically. It's like living it rather than you need to do this or that or whatever. It's sort of, it's around you, and by osmosis you get it without it having to be said. And so I think it's, I think hopefully my kids will have they've had a similar upbringing in a way. I mean, I have, we have people over that are involved in music and arts and all this stuff, and I think they know that. They don't dwell on the fact that I make music, and that's like, as they get older, they've become a little more interested in it, kind of. But I've never made a huge deal of it. But occasionally they're like, "What do you do, anyways?" And so now, as they're older, it's more fun that they know. They're like, "Oh my God, look at this crazy YouTube video of you I just found," or whatever. It's like, and I'll refuse to look at it, and they'll laugh, stuff like that. But
Yeah, because I was going to ask before, like, when you said that you had just like from an early age, you had felt like you were going to be an artist or you wanted to be an artist.
Right.
I don't even know. You said it wasn't even like a conscious thing necessarily. I'm paraphrasing, but I was going to ask about that, and it seems to me that it was just like, I don't know about a like fait accompli, but definitely just like being raised in this kind of context, you don't think that it's like a crazy thing to make art, or you don't think that it's like it's like a far off occupation, or like, oh,
Yeah.
that's not for me.
No. And I think that's quite unusual, perhaps, or whatever. But that's how it was for me, definitely. It was just like, oh, absolutely. I mean, my dad, he's like, I think your greatest accomplishment is not getting a job, so, and that I've been able to keep doing what I prefer to do, for quite some time now. So I've gotten no flack from my parents for pursuing, this career, quotes. I don't know.
Hey, you don't have to put it in quotes. It's for real.
Yeah, it's happening.
Yeah. So, how did your parents become artists then? Because I'm trying to like imagine they're growing up in what, the like late 40s into the 50s.
Yeah. I don't know. Like my dad was, his parents, my grandparents were very working class, like from Toledo, and they have Hungarian roots, which there's lots of Hungarians in Toledo, and my grandfather worked in a glass factory. I actually don't know how he became an artist. I mean, I think he had a natural talent that somebody must have said, oh, you're pretty good at this, you should try it out. I'll have to ask him. Yeah, I don't actually know how he arrived at that. And he did really well in school, and I'm not sure, and he definitely pursued. I mean, he did start teaching almost right away. He wasn't sort of like a gallery artist, which I think is somewhat of a disappointment for him, or whatever, that he's never... I mean, he loves teaching, but I think if he had a choice, he would have rather just make art all the time and
Sure.
sell paintings or photos or whatever. What's interesting is I have a much younger brother who is the one who is a successful artist, like a painter.
Really?
Yeah. His name is Zach Prekop, so you can look. He's like 15 years younger than I am. And sort of... So when I was in art school, I stopped when I started playing rock music, and he went on to get his master's, which is sort of what you need to do to get your foot into that gallery scene, sort of, because it's very much who you know and at the right time. Not that he's, schmoozing in that direction. He's a super hard worker as well, but you need to sort of get that foundation happening. So that's where he kept going, and so he makes paintings all the time and sells them all and does really well.
Oh, yeah.
Where I was distracted by the rock and roll, and that's how I stopped painting and started doing music full time, and that was totally unexpected. That was not part of my plan.
I mean, one thing I have to imagine that gallery, like being a professional artist is much in the same way as like working in Hollywood, where it is 95% who you know. And
it's a big part of it.
Yeah.
I mean, when you go to grad school, your friends become the gallerists and critics that you need to get you to the next level. And then they know the other. So it's just the nature of it. I don't think it's unfortunate if you're unable to get to that point and you really want to, I suppose. But I think, if you're going to pursue that, it's sort of what you need to do. There are exceptions, of course, obviously, but
yeah. But no, like the people that like my wife and I have come up with, like people who were assistants are now development executives, right? And they're the ones making the choices about like what TV shows to make. It's all. I was reading this article yesterday. A woman, I forget her name, but she in the 1970s, she's writing about activism in feminist circles, and she's writing about like how do group dynamics form. And she's like, there's no real conspiracies, right? There aren't these kind of like, I mean, there are back rooms where, captains of industry are smoking cigars and patting each other on the back, but those aren't designed as conspiracies. It's just that they are friends who have coalesced around certain things. And like each, whatever you're talking, and she was talking about in terms of like, how could you possibly manage activism to actually get things done, to like attain power, when these are what the dynamics are. And as I'm reading it, I'm like, oh, these are the exact same dynamics probably in any kind of like art, where art and commerce meet, right? Whether you're talking about gallery, painting, not painting necessarily, but creating art for galleries, or making television, or making music, or whatever it is. There happens to be that like kind of, unless your art overpowers those kind of like bonds, right? That for whatever reason, someone takes a shine to it. I think it's really interesting that those are what we kind of like ignore those dynamics a lot of time, but those are some of the most important ones, whether we like it or not.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. So for the music stuff, I don't pay any attention to any of that stuff you're supposed to do, and I'm sure that drives some people crazy. Like, why this dude does not know how to sing? Has picked up guitar by accident and all this stuff. And so I have been lucky in some ways, but also I did the work as well. So that's like the foundation. There's no way you can not do the work, basically. All the other stuff, you can get lucky and meet the right people, which happened to me in some ways. Or you can, I think you put yourself in some danger if you focus too much on pursuing being in the right spot at the right time. Obviously, that has flummoxed many people, and it just hasn't worked. And that's because the work is not first, in a way. Anyways, that's how I go at it. That's how I've always gone at it.
Did you have this work ethic when you were a kid? Like, when does this become, like, I had to learn a work ethic. When I got to, I think my second year of college, I took this Heidegger course, and it was so difficult. I had to have a work ethic, and that's when I started to like really put my nose to the grindstone.
I mean, I was never a great student in anything else besides arts, basically. And I think for me, it's if I enjoy it on some profound level, it's no problem for me to work on it as much as possible. That's not the case, and I feel lucky that's the case for me, but so I have a lousy work ethic involved with anything else besides what I want to do, basically. Yeah. And that's also to a fault, big time. Like, I'm terrible with doing my taxes on time. I'm lousy at, I'm a bad like, I don't read a lot of books and stuff. I'm sort of, because I'm always just working on my own stuff, so kind of, I feel like I'm pretty good at being a dad, though, luckily. So I have not blown that off. And I think so anyway, that's my other work, so it's been good.
I mean, were you a precocious kid? Because I'm trying to imagine like you're around all these adults who are treating, at least intellectually treating you like an adult in some way. And I'm trying to imagine like what happens when you're among other kids.
I don't think I laid it on other kids. No, I would not say precocious. It was pretty, I'm very easygoing. No one would say that I'm causing any trouble anymore. I think one thing I've noticed is I've been able to always get along with other kids or people who many might consider having really difficult personalities. So I think I have a soft spot for people that would be considered a total pain in the ass by others. So I think I'm generous in that sense. I think actually.
What made you like that?
I think that comes from my mom, who's a super sweetheart, and I think just forgiving. I don't know. I could be totally full of shit. I'm not sure. I don't know.
But I mean, do you just empathize? Like if you are around someone who's just kind of like a jerk, do you just empathize with them? Or are you just like kind of,
I mean,
or is it like water off your back?
If that's all there is, it's not going to happen. But I think it's, I see through that flaw, I guess, in a way or whatever. There's something interesting about most people or anybody I've encountered. If I'm going to deal with them, there must be something else besides just being, a jerk. Definitely. So.
Because you do seem like an easygoing, just, in the, 40 minutes or so we've been talking, you do seem very easygoing. And I can imagine you as a child just being able to kind of, not chameleon, because it's not like you're changing to be in these different groups, but you're just like, you can slide into these groups and just be yourself in them.
Yeah, I mean, I always had friends, I was never like a loner type or whatever, or tortured in any way, it's sort of, so I never had any issue. I was always, popular enough in school and had a broad range of friends. So it was never something I had to focus on, which is, quite lucky. So I did have an easygoing childhood in general, I'd say. No, not very angsty at all, just, yeah.
But I think, saying that, like, you didn't do the, like, at least in music, you didn't, pay attention to, like, who you were supposed to know or any of the kind of, like, social dynamics of that stuff. But I can see you as the kind of person who just kind of, like, naturally is people want to be around in some way. Does that make sense?
Well, that sounds great. Yeah. I think so. I mean, I think, if you're able to do what you need to do, what you think you need to do at any given time, I think you're going to naturally be in the right position to be near the right people. I don't think there's any way to design that to happen, really.
Yeah.
And I think that's a trap that many have fallen into, and it boils down to, again, is like, the work is first, and do the best you can with that, and it will shake down in other ways. I mean, I expected nothing when I doing any of this, and so that I've been able to eke out a career in music. I'm still pleasantly shocked, and I never assumed that I deserved any of it or whatever, and it's not. And I think that also boils down to, it's like the most joy I get is, bringing something to conclusion that I can stand behind and feel good about. And I'm still pleased to hear from people that they, I hear from quite a few people randomly that some record I've made or some song or a photo I've taken has moved them or inspired them to do something, and that's it's not something I dwell on, but that does not happen to everybody, and so I'm always very gracious and pleased to hear it, and it's good.
Oh yeah, totally. So wait, so what's your mom's background, right?
So she was an artist as well, but more in design. She was sort of involved with fashion and stuff, but she pretty early on became like my mom first, before she sort of let her artistic pursuits not fall away. I mean, but it was never like a career point for her. But she, had a natural gift for drawing and designing, and just has a way about her that was, pretty intense. I mean, she was a great cook and great artist in a lot of ways. But she did not pursue it as a career like my dad, which, was definitely 60s, 70s, dad goes out, brings home the bacon kind of, that was still happening even within the sort of artistic family unit. That was sort of, my mom stayed home and made dinner every night kind of stuff. So.
Does she also come from a working class background?
So her father was not working class. He was like a scientist.
Oh,
I'm
wow.
not sure. And he worked for, I don't know who exactly, but he was like a chemist basically for, I don't know who, but so he was definitely not blue collar, working class, definitely sort of educated up the ladder a bit, somewhat. And he died when I was really young, so I think that's probably why I don't actually know. I mean, I think he died when I was like 3 or 4, so I don't actually know anything about him or much.
I do think there is something interesting, though, in chemistry, my friends who are chemists or who are professors of chemistry, it's about the work, right? Creating an experiment, right? It's the day-to-day is like building stuff. There's a lot of engineering that goes into this, and like working with your hands and putting this stuff and doing the actual like physical labor. Because when I was, the hypothesis I had in my head about you was, I'm like, oh, well, your dad comes from this working class background, and now, I'm just guessing at this, but your mom your grandfather was a scientist, there is this certain sense of like the labor of making art. Like you grow up with this, not just physically around you with your parents making things, but also just like it's in your background a little bit, the idea of art as labor.
Right. I mean, I think there's a very basicness to that, like you do things so that something can happen, basically. And it's kind of, like the actual work of it is not always magical or whatever, it's not, but it's the nuts and bolts of it. And I think you figure that out early on that, you have to do something for it to happen, basically.
Yeah.
But it doesn't, to get to that point, it can just be fun. I think it's human nature to want to mess with stuff, and that's a big part of it. It's like, let's see what happens if I do this or that or whatever. I mean, so I'm in the Sea and Cake, but I also make these solo synth records, which is my latest thing that I just finished. And the way I work on that, it's a real cross between like painting and making music and drawing and taking photos, because so I work with this modular synth stuff, and a lot of the work is just messing around with it.
Yes. Yeah.
And just playing around with it. And then the hard part comes when you have to decide what of it could possibly translate to somebody else as music, basically. But hours and hours of just, it's sort of like pushing paint around or pushing sound around, basically. And that's what's so great about it. I mean, it doesn't make it easier, but the day-to-day work of it is quite pleasant and, sort of engaging in a gentle sort of way. It's not until later where it becomes quite arduous and you have to make decisions. That's the real work, is, you have to decide what is good and what is not, and stuff like that. And that's the same with painting too. It's fun and great until you need to decide, is this a good or a bad painting? Is it done or should I still work on it? And of course, those decisions pile up, and it becomes, that's when the real work happens or whatever. So, anyways, but I think that's the handoff, the trade-off in a way. It's like you get some, you've got to play around and mess around, and to be able to do that, you also have to make hard choices later at some point, so that you can go back and start again. That's why I don't want to. That's the cycle. You can keep it going, I think.
Yeah, but the foundation of all of this stuff is just the like you said, you were pushing sound around, or like I saw a video the other day of someone creating the canvas for they're like, oh, I have to make my own canvas, and they went to Home Depot and they bought the wood. And you saw them actually stretching the canvas around it and stapling it in. And like the actual, I think about this is the dumbest version of it, but like the actual pleasure of setting up recording equipment. There's some pleasure in putting, it's very minor, it's slight pleasure, but in hooking everything up to prepare yourself to make something.
Oh no, all that stuff's great. And it's sort of a pleasant distraction, a lot of musicians are way into the gear. I count myself guilty as charged. I love buying all the stuff and trying to figure it out and dreaming of what you need to get to the next level, stuff like that. But for maybe 5 years ago, I became obsessed with black and white photography, and I set up a dark room, and I love that work, making the prints and figuring. I had no idea how to do it, and so I got to start at zero, learn how to process the film, learn how to build a dark room, and how to print it and what you need to do, and I loved it. I loved everything about it, and it took a while to get to the point. And actually, a big part of what I loved it is there was much less baggage to it with me. It wasn't painting, it wasn't music, but it was still obviously an artistic pursuit, but I wasn't I'm going to be a photographer now, kind of thing. It was sort of like my real hobby in a sense. So, the work was the same, and I was as much into it as anything else, but I really didn't care what anyone else thought about it so much, so, but...
Okay, well, towards the end, I just have one question left, because you mentioned this earlier, and it's been kind of rolling around my head the entire time. You said you were on the path to be an artist, or a painter, and then there was I think your word was fluke, that kind of pushed you into music.
Right.
What was that process? Because I'm in my mind, I imagine people who we are or what we end up as. I imagine all these vectors pushing on us in different ways. And, if the vector is strong enough, it pushes you off the path you were kind of on. And so those moments.
That's what happened. Yeah.
Those moments are really, I'm really curious about them.
So growing up, music was a big deal in our house. Nobody played it though. We just, listened to it. Mm-hmm. But listening to, the right records and really getting into how it sounds, was all. So I grew up appreciating sound and music and all that stuff, and it's a big deal. But no one in my family ever actually played music, which is sort of interesting, and absolutely no desire. My dad has never said, or my mom, I really would love to learn how to play the piano. None of that occurred, which is kind of interesting. I think because they were all consumed with, making paintings and sculpture and stuff. So it was in art school. Well, it's sort of before that. So I grew up being obsessed with listening to music, basically, and really into it, totally. And one of my dad's friends, also my friend, was a musician, and he played with kind of a local blues, Chicago blues legend, but not a famous one necessarily, but to like people into the blues, they know who he is, and he's sort of, and that was a big passion of mine in high school and stuff. So it's sort of through him that I got to see like what musicians do, and I, got really into it, and sort of, and I think at some point, I think he offered to let me. I don't know how he would have thought like, hey, do you want to borrow this guitar? But for some reason, he lent me a guitar or something, and that was basically the start of it. I was still in high school, and I enjoyed it thoroughly, just messing around and not worrying about what I was doing at all, and just and also I think obviously I got a harmonica as well. If you're going to be playing the blues, you must have the blues harp. So anyways, that was the very beginnings where I first touched an instrument, I guess. But it didn't, I think I probably learned to do something super rudimentary on it, but I didn't get too far with it. So forward to art school, where I was completely, painting my ass off. That's all I was doing the whole time and whatever. But I worked in the wood shop, at the school wood shop, and the two other guys working in there, since we were hanging out all the time, somehow it came up like, oh, I have a banjo, and Ian Schneller was actually somewhat accomplished musician. I mean, he definitely knew how to play guitar, but he also had wild ideas that anyone can play anything and do whatever they want. So somehow we started hanging out and just started playing stuff, and that was the beginning. And I did not know how to play anything at that point, and it did not matter at all. And I was hooked from that point on. And we started playing sort of like art school parties pretty early on without having some, we would sort of like improvise, but it wasn't like free improv jazz. It was more sort of like free improv whatever you might be able to sort of pull off, I mean, there's hallmarks of art school bands, like Velvet Underground and David Bowie, and I think Tom Waits was a big deal at that time, and sort of kind of an anything goes kitchen sink aesthetic to it was sort of floating around in art schools at that time anyways. And I think that Ian knew how to play guitar. Definitely, we could hang on what he was doing kind of in a sense. And so it sort of sounded like music anyways. So that was it. That's how I started.
And that was enough to, what was it eventually that like...
at that point, I was like, it was something, I was really into it, but it did not take over like, my painting stuff or whatever. I think it was, so eventually we started playing shows like in bars and stuff. And I think, and when it, sort of, we got better at it, and people were starting to pay some attention. And so it just sort of gradually built up. And then when we put out our first record, it was like, I can't believe this is happening, and all this stuff. So so it was just, and I was still, and this continued on after I graduated from undergraduate. But it definitely, like I mentioned before, I think I would have gone to graduate school had I not started pursuing music stuff, basically.
Interesting.
And so that's what happened.
Oh, man.
And it just very organically grew from there. I mean, we got an audience, and people started to pay attention to us, and it just went from there, basically.
I love it. Sam, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me.
You're welcome. Yeah.
In this weird way over Zoom.
Totally. Yeah. Excellent.
And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye,